Well, the fallout continues over Georgia's new election law. President Biden calling it an atrocity, getting a lot of pushback right now. Joining us now to discuss is Georgia Congressman Austin Scott. Congressman, good to see you. This, it made a lot of headlines after one of your local assemblymen there, or assemblywoman rather, making headlines outside, being arrested, obviously back to the Georgia Capitol now, because there are a lot of folks that are upset about what Governor Brian Kemp has done with this laws. Others say, finally, it's about time that someone had stood up for voting laws, specifically in the Peach State. What does this new law mean for voters, and what sticks out to you, Congressman?
Yeah, so first of all, one of the things that people haven't talked about is why are we making the changes? And in the election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, there were 207,000 absentees, and it represented somewhere around 5% of the total vote. And in this last election, there were 1.2 million absentee ballots, so it went up to about 25% of the vote. And so it is the only method in Georgia in which you don't have to show a voter a state ID or a driver's license to vote. And so when you have 25% of the vote that's not having to show an ID and the other 75% is, then you've got questions about the integrity of that portion of the ballot just by definition. And so I think that what they did, requiring the ID on the absentee ballots, just like they required on other ballots, it's just simple common sense and had to be done.
What do you have to say to folks that do push back on this? Because you would assume asking for an ID to vote for elected lawmakers within your state, within your country, that would be necessary. Others say that it disenfranchises some voters. But you need an ID to buy alcohol. You need an ID to adopt a cat. You're going to need an ID to prove you're a certain age to get a vaccine. But voting in the state of Georgia, you now need one for absentee ballot voting. What do you say to folks that argue against that decision?
I would encourage them to actually read the legislation. There's a lot of drama out there on the TV right now being orchestrated by Senator Ralph Warnock. Obviously, President Biden has bought into it. But if you actually read the legislation and what it says, most of it is minor changes to existing law. The key provision of it is that now you have to show a voter ID on absentee ballots, just like you have to show it on in-person or early ballots. We have more access to voting, more days to vote, and more ways to vote in the state of Georgia than the majority of the Democratic-controlled states out there do. So I would encourage them to actually read the legislation, look at the legislation, based on the facts of what was actually signed in law instead of what you're hearing from, extremists on the other side.
Well, what's happening in Georgia, there's still pushback with critics in your state issuing calls. This was on Monday to boycott some of the state's largest businesses because they're not speaking out more forcefully on this issue against that law. A day after advocacy organizations filed a lawsuit in federal court challenging it. What's your reaction to that, to essentially pressuring these local businesses to get involved in this?
Yeah, so that's not good for America, first and foremost. Economic boycotting, economic terrorism, those are the types of things that our enemies, that our foreign enemies want to see done inside the United States. So if we have differences of opinion on something, then we should settle those differences of opinion. But to turn around and attack American industry that provides the jobs, that provides the tax revenue for our country, to have the school systems that we have and the roads that we have and the national security apparatus that we have with our military, attacking American industry is a lose-lose proposition. And so I would encourage them to not use those tactics. Those are the tactics that Russians and Chinese would use. And this is a democracy. Let's use more democratic methods of making our point.
I want to talk to you about the border, but before I do want to get your comment on this vaccine passport, if you will, that's been floated out there because you mentioned the private sector. This could do this critics say this would have harm on the private sector if states allow this or say you would need a COVID passport to go to a concert or see a movie. Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis already pushing against this. Do you support a vaccine passport federally?
Absolutely not. And I have been vaccinated. I want to encourage people to get vaccinated if they so choose. But the idea that the federal government gets to mandate that we're going to put something into our bodies, or we're not going to be allowed to participate in society in the United States. That is not what happens in a free society. So I believe in personal freedoms, individual liberties, and economic opportunities, and I hope that people will go get the vaccine if they choose to, but absolutely opposed to mandating the vaccine, absolutely opposed to a passport that says if you don't go get the vaccine, which is effectively the mandate, then you can't participate in the freedoms that we love in this country.
All right, before you go, I do want to ask you about this, the border crisis, what we've seen so far. You've been quoted as saying it's the worst it's ever been. Tell us what you know. What have you seen? Have you been to the border? What have you heard?
So I've more than been to the border. I've been to Honduras. I've been to Guatemala. I've been to Salvador. I've talked with the leadership in those countries. And Barack Obama was the president at the time that I made that trip. And the bottom line is, remember that a lot of the people that are coming to the border don't speak English. A lot of them are not well educated. Not talking about them from the standpoint of the quality of who they are as individuals, just speaking the facts. And what I was told multiple times from the leadership of those other countries is that the coyotes in those countries, the cartels in those countries, the transnational criminal organizations in those countries, when they go out to people, they're not targeting educated people. They're targeting people who don't understand English fluently. And what they're telling them is that as long as you can get one person to the United States, that person will become a citizen, and then everybody can come to the United States. Now, that's what I'm told from the leadership in other countries. And when the president of the United States has run a campaign for well over a year saying, we're going to have an open border policy, I don't understand why Joe Biden is surprised that they've shown up at the border. I don't understand why they weren't prepared for the surge. Any normal person would have expected it. And so for him to pretend this isn't a crisis is just absolutely ridiculous. The other thing that I think we as Americans have got to recognize in this is the bias of the press. If President Trump were the president right now, can you imagine the stories that CNN, ABC, NBC, any other news station would be carrying about just how bad the humanitarian crisis is and the poor treatment of human beings at the border? I mean, this is abnormal and dangerous for America. How fast they have flipped their definition of what a crisis is in the mainstream media.
Well, I think one of the biggest points of that, and I'll let you go, but the kids in cages, right? Nothing has changed since the Obama administration, Trump administration, Biden administration. They're all kept in the same way. Maybe some of the things have changed, but it was kids in cages when it was Trump. Now it's, I don't even know what it is at this point. The safe facilities for children, who knows? But that's one of the biggest narratives that come along with it.
It's a bad situation, and we as a country, we've spent trillions of dollars over the last several decades trying to bring stability to the Middle East, and we have ignored the Western Hemisphere. Yeah. And so I'll tell you, as someone who's on the Armed Services Committee, if you're inside the United States, the transnational criminal organizations are a greater threat to you and your family than Al-Qaeda or any of the other terrorist organizations that we talk about on a daily basis from the Middle East. The transnational criminal organizations are effectively running those countries in our own backyard, and we need to do what we can to stop it. And having open borders is going absolutely in the wrong direction.
Congressman, I appreciate your time. Congressman Austin Scott of Georgia joining us live here. Good to see you. Thanks.